Amelia, still labeled thoughtless and insignificant by those around her, faced criticism during a family trip. Her mother-in-law, seizing the moment when her son, Amelia's husband, stepped away, voiced her displeasure directly. The journey, intended as a joyful escape Amelia had organized at her husband's request, swiftly turned sour. At the sharp jabs of her mother-in-law, Amelia resolved to remove herself from the situation, her departure underscoring her disinterest in the ensuing family dynamics. Amelia, a committed professional thriving in a day-care assistant, had adapted to a mostly remote work setup since her marriage, which afforded her ample home time. Her husband, Henry, held himself in high regard, often prioritizing appearances and indulging in extravagant spending, all without contributing financially to the household, a fact Amelia had been oblivious to during their courtship. Over time, living together peeled back the layers of his facade, revealing his true persona. Henry's mother, a woman proud and vocal about her son's every minor achievement, seemed to embody the stereotype of a mother excessively devoted to her son. Although Amelia was somewhat prepared for this and willing to accommodate it to an extent, the reality proved challenging. Her mother-in-law's obstinate nature and dismissal of other perspectives, including her own husband's, only compounded the difficulties. She harbored a clear disdain for Amelia, frequently undermining her by dismissing her remote work as trivial and equating it to mere leisure at the computer. Despite the challenges, Amelia's remote work was legitimate and full-time, though her mother-in-law painted it as negligible and accused Amelia of laziness. While her husband understood her professional commitments, he seldom corrected his mother's harsh misconceptions, leaving Amelia to navigate the strained family dynamics largely on her own. Despite his presence, my husband often ignores issues between his mother and me, even when these occur right in front of him. He tends to sidestep these confrontations, suggesting that we handle it well amongst ourselves, effectively leaving the burden on me. He prefers to remain uninvolved, claiming he wants to avoid trouble. This detachment reached a peak when, after persistent requests for his support on a similar issue, he abruptly handed me completed divorce papers. Though I was deeply hurt, the daunting notion that divorcing might be harder than marrying made me reconsider and ultimately yield to his stance. It became clear to me that my husband always puts his mother first. This realization was frustrating, but it also motivated me to devise strategies to cope with her abrasive manner while diplomatically keeping the peace. My decision not to pursue a divorce wasn't due to a change of heart about our relationship. Rather, I sensed my husband believed I was too enamored with him to ever leave. His arrogance seemed to grow each day, and while it's endearing to see a child mimic adulthood, it's quite off-putting when an adult does it. I've since learned to overlook his boastful declarations and disregard his antics. Another reason for not seeking a divorce is our living situation. My husband's job requires us to live far from my in-laws, limiting our interactions to once or twice a year, a frequency I felt I could endure. During a time when everyone was excited about the possibility of 9 consecutive days off by cleverly scheduling vacations around weekends, both of us were busy working. For me, US holidays have little impact since I adjust my schedule to international demands. My husband, on the other hand, did not take the extended break. However, after returning from work one day, he suddenly proposed an overseas vacation, inspired by his colleagues who had arranged such a break. His pride in this plan only fueled his regret at not having done the same earlier. His suggestion caught me off guard, not just because of its suddenness, but also because of its impracticality. He had never traveled abroad and didn't even have a passport. Recognizing these limitations, I proposed a domestic trip instead, assuring him that there wouldn't be any language barriers or other issues if he traveled with me, given my fluency in multiple languages. During my student years, I had the opportunity to study abroad and enjoyed numerous solo international trips. Beyond English, I am comfortable conversing in Spanish and can manage a bit of Chinese when needed. When my mother became fascinated with Korean dramas, I even started learning Korean with her. Although I haven't had many chances to use it, making me somewhat less confident in my skills. Despite my linguistic abilities, obtaining passports isn't an instantaneous process, something my husband didn't quite grasp. I suggested planning an overseas trip during the summer or winter when we'd have ample time, but he dismissed my advice. Instead, he impulsively chose a destination, took leave without consulting anyone, and expected me to fit everything into our schedule. It wasn't just a vacation, he envisioned a family tour without considering the logistics involved. He nonchalantly declared that English would suffice since it's a universal language, believing just the two of us would manage fine abroad. But then, he casually added that we should take his mother along, implying that managing both their first-time international travels would be my responsibility. He framed it as an act of filial piety that could potentially endear me to them. Presenting these plans as if they were to my benefit, he seemed to think he was doing me a favor. Arguing felt pointless. So, I silently went along with his plans, but I also hatched a plan of my own. Starting with the passport applications for my husband and mother-in-law, I took care of booking flights and hotels. It was a significant amount of work, but necessary to execute my idea flawlessly. On the day of our departure, my mother-in-law, oblivious to my efforts, cheerfully praised her son, expecting nothing less than business-class seats for our long journey. I knew my husband likely took all the credit, boasting about making all the arrangements and planning the itinerary. In reality, I had orchestrated everything, while they had simply handed over the responsibility to me. Having minimal familiarity with navigating airports, my travel companions wandered off to explore on their own while I managed the check-in and boarding processes. They seemed to roam aimlessly, even during the dull moments, and I struggled to locate them afterwards. The airport staff even offered to make an announcement over the intercom for us. It was all because Amelia didn't inform us of the boarding gate, causing unnecessary chaos, yet they showed no regret. Meanwhile, Amelia seemed intent on enjoying the trip solo, neglecting us completely. Throughout the flight, they were fairly quiet, but it was still a source of annoyance and embarrassment each time they summoned a flight attendant. After enduring the flight, and completing the immigration formalities in the destination country, I was looking forward to a restful evening at the hotel. However, just as we were about to leave the airport, my husband abruptly handed me his luggage, announcing he needed the restroom, and dashed off. It was perplexing that he was the only one feeling unwell when we all shared the same meals. Perhaps his overenthusiastic interaction with his favorite flight attendant was to blame. Amelia, lacking consideration, questioned the duration of her stay, undermining the trip I had planned with my son, suggesting it was a special mother-son vacation that didn't require her presence. She accused Amelia of being a freeloader, asserting that she had no right to enjoy the trip without contributing financially. Despite the harsh words, I decided it was best to leave. Handing the luggage back to my mother-in-law and keeping only my carry-on, I walked away, leaving her stunned with my decision. She couldn't believe her own suggestion for me to leave had been taken seriously. I managed to suppress my laughter. My husband, frequently visiting the restroom, didn't see me depart. Fortunately, I secured a ticket back to America. On the plane, I contemplated how differently things might have unfolded if our relationship had been stronger. I might have enjoyed being included more thoroughly in the trip. Acting as a tour guide for my mother-in-law and her son was more stressful than rewarding, so I opted out. Imagining them fumbling without me brought a smirk to my face, especially considering their limited language skills. Sure, they could use a translation app, but I doubted my husband, who loved to appear more important than he was, would resort to using his smartphone for help. After taking a few day tours, I arrived safely at the luxury hotel where my parents were staying. I had arranged a luxury getaway in upstate New York for them, at the insistence of my husband, Henry, who had always preached respect for my parents. They enjoyed a scenic route, relishing the views and meals along the way. I surprised them by arriving earlier than expected, and their astonishment grew when I explained my abrupt departure. Henry tried to reach me repeatedly, bombarding my phone with calls and messages, which I chose to ignore. Turning off my phone, I fully immersed myself in the joy of the day with my parents. The drama unfolded further when I finally picked up a call from the embassy upon returning home. They explained that after Henry had come out of the restroom, he was shocked to find his mother alone, and furious that I wasn't there. Unable to contact me, he attempted to navigate to the hotel on his own. Unfortunately, he fell prey to a scam by a seemingly helpful stranger who spoke broken English. They promised to guide him to the hotel, but instead robbed him of all his money, passport, and valuables, even stripping his mother of her jewelry. Found destitute on the street by the police, he was referred to the embassy for assistance. The administrative assistant contacted me, requesting I come to retrieve him. Henry was unable to access any funds since his wallet, containing all his bank cards, was stolen. Despite the unfortunate events, the experience underscored the importance of self-reliance and cautious trust when traveling. When I was questioned about why I, a stranger, had to undertake certain tasks, I clarified that I was no longer married to the man involved. In truth, I had held onto the divorce papers he had once angrily thrown at me. Initially, I hesitated to file for divorce, fearing the complications it might bring. However, this time, I had reached my breaking point. After completing the necessary paperwork, I landed back in the States and headed straight to the hotel. To my relief, the divorce process concluded smoothly and without any objections. I had already secured a new apartment, and the lease was signed during my travel preparations. The idea of using the furniture I once shared with my ex-husband, Henry, was unbearable. Thus, in my new home, I decided to start fresh with all new furnishings. I packed for both my trip and my move, taking only my work tools and favorite outfits. The rest could be shipped to my new address at a scheduled time. The embassy staff asked no further questions, and the conversation ended there. It later came to light that my former in-laws had intervened to help Henry and his mother return to the States. Henry, unable to control his anger, confronted me, accusing me of divorcing him without his knowledge and abandoning him. I reminded him that the divorce was his idea initially, as he was the one who presented the papers. His reaction was incredulous, questioning my tactics and how much more I intended to embarrass him. In response, I could have shared an embarrassing story about him being a regular at an adult entertainment club, deeply involved with a particular dancer. He had been squandering money on her rather than contributing to our household, which had led to substantial debts. A debt collection agency had even contacted him, a fact I knew because of a letter addressed to Henry at our home. His reckless spending and the dancer's manipulative tactics, which aimed to deter his visits by demanding ever more lavish gifts, were off-putting. I wondered how Henry would react if he knew the full extent of his actions and their consequences. It's quite the embarrassing tale, isn't it? I warned Henry that if he continued to make a scene or contacted me again, I would reveal everything to his employer. The idea of being disliked by the woman he was obsessed with would be a devastating blow to him, given his personality. After I mentioned this, Henry's tone shifted dramatically. He muttered something inaudible in a weak voice and ended the call. A few days later, I received a call from my ex-father-in-law. Surprisingly, he informed me that he had divorced my ex-mother-in-law. While we were no longer related, he seemed eager to share insights into her character, perhaps because we had both suffered from her behavior. He had grown suspicious of her activities, and, upon investigating, discovered that she had drained his retirement savings on beauty treatments and cosmetic procedures. As I'm not well versed in such matters, I was completely taken aback. When he sought a woman's perspective, I was at a loss since I hadn't noticed any significant changes myself. I even questioned him about the effectiveness of these treatments, considering the amount spent with little visible improvement. It seemed like a waste of money. Now destitute, my ex-mother-in-law turned to her son, Henry, for support. However, Henry was drowning in debt from his divorce and had even lost his apartment due to unpaid rent. He and his mother were now living in a dilapidated apartment. Despite their dire circumstances, his mother continued her expensive beauty regimens without any intention of finding work, further burdening Henry. I heard he was working non-stop to cover both their living expenses and her beauty treatments. The irony was that despite their declining living standards, they still strived to maintain a facade of grandeur. Rumors suggested that the quality of the beauty treatments had deteriorated significantly, and she had visibly aged. As for me, I was enjoying the peace of living alone, focusing on improving my work and valuing the freedom to manage my life and finances independently. This whole situation served as a reminder of the importance of living within one's means.